Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well and enjoying Unreal Fest. Thank you. Yes, this gentleman certainly is, that's great. Thanks for your time today to join our session. Super excited to have you with us. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how you can unlock the value of your audiences with sponsors. So what is this session going to look like? Firstly, we'll start with who we are. Don't worry, we'll keep that relatively brief before we move on to the juicy stuff. We'll then discuss why we're really excited about what sponsors can bring to Fortnite. And then we'll talk about the past 2 years, our work in the space, and the work we've done with sponsors alongside creators alike in the Fortnite ecosystem. We'll then wrap up, and we'd love to throw to some questions to you guys because this whole thing is about being collaborative. And in order to move forward in this space together, we're going to have to keep talking and work this all out together, which we're excited to do.
Awesome. So I'll just provide a little bit of context on why we're effectively giving an advertising talk at a game developers conference. Over the past few days, we've all sat in some pretty interesting talks and seen some pretty interesting technical features being launched. That, of course, is very exciting. Our view, however, is that technical features obviously need developers to make stuff with them. Developers need money to live. So these technical features are great, but ultimately, if they don't result in developers getting paid, unfortunately, they won't be used.
So first up, who are we? I'm Ashley, Managing Director at Metavision, a creative agency for immersive media platforms.
And I'm Ryan. I'm a Creative Director at Metavision and work alongside Ashley.
So why us? Why are we here today talking to you lovely people? Well, in a previous life, Ryan and I have come from the worlds of advertising and media. So a lot of that time has been spent in rooms with people that get extremely excited over anything that gets people's attention and engagement. And so we might be showing our age here a little bit, but we spent sort of the collective... the collective sort of 2 decades together working out with brands and IP holders how we can grab and capture that attention for them. That's becoming increasingly hard in today's world. As you know, people's attention is becoming more and more fragmented, and it's harder and harder to vie for that attention. And so, as part of that journey, what Ryan, myself, and the rest of the Metavision team have been on, we've created Metavision Network. Put simply, Metavision Network is all about bringing Fortnite creators together with IP holders and brands who want access to those audiences. There are a few other outfits out there doing exactly what we're doing, and they're doing it really well. Some might be in the audience today. I think I've spotted a few. Yes, lovely boys over at Zoned. And shout out to you guys. And look, we've all got slightly different approaches and ways of going about things, but ultimately, we think we all want the exact same thing. We want Fortnite to be a platform that one day might be able to trade blows with the likes of TV, YouTube, and TikTok, or anywhere where brands want to speak to their audiences. So, why now? Why are we giving this talk in 2025 and not a few years ago, for example? Well, in our opinion, a lot has changed in the space and the ecosystem over the last couple of years. And even in the last 24 hours, we've heard loads of great stuff from the keynote speech and all the other talks that have been going on. There's clearly a lot of momentum in this space, and there's exciting new drops happening daily. But we think 2025 essentially marks a really big step change in the stakes of this space of the Fortnite ecosystem, where those stakes point to a future where Fortnite can finally go shoulder to shoulder with traditional media powerhouses of this world. These stakes are very much out there and plain to see in the data which Fishstick is standing in front of. So let's get into it. You've guessed it, we're going to go through some numbers today. We'll make sure they're not too hard to grasp, don't worry. Because we just, essentially at the end of the day, we can't talk about the value of Fortnite audiences for brands and IP holders without going into the numbers and doing just that. So, first up, the number that changed everything and the world. 350 million paid out to creators per year. So this has been updated today, based on what we heard on the keynote speech yesterday. So as we know, Engagement 2.0 came along in 2023 and just changed the approach to development on Fortnite. Overnight, UEFN developers turned into massive businesses. Smaller creators were able to make a full-time career out of UEFN. It was pretty incredible to see, to be honest. And of course, new creators resulted in new ideas, communities grew and flourished around those experiences. However, with this number that you can see on the screen right now, it's a little tricky because we can't know exactly how that number is reached. There's an algorithm, and Epic are sort of very much akin to that, and at times it can be a bit of a black box. Obviously, intuition can lead us to do some guessing, and what we've seen is games designed kind of like YouTube videos to target the algorithm. So, doing things, working with certain types of thumbnails or gameplay to try and maximize that engagement. But how the engagement figure is paid out is ultimately down to Epic, and obviously they want to be fair and they want new work to flourish. So it's a bit tricky in that regard. However, there is a number which was presented alongside this number. It's not quite as sexy because it doesn't have a dollar sign next to it, so it doesn't get talked about quite as much. However, we think it's incredibly sexy to us anyway, and we think it should be to you guys. So that is the 11.2 billion hours played on the platform since UEFN was launched. And this number is absolute gold dust to IP holders and brands. They'll literally salivate over this number because it's where their audiences are and that's where they can find engagement. And they'll often pay a premium to reach that audience on platforms like Fortnite because they're just particularly hard to reach audiences. And these hours, unlike the figure on the previous slide, is very much in your hands, in the creator's hands. You can do completely what you want with it. So, there's no algorithm, no black box. It's just creators deciding how they want to spend those hours. If a creator wants to utilize those hours completely, they can. They can do brand sponsorships, or they can choose not. You can switch it on and switch it off as you like.
So, how do we make you guys see that number through the same rose-tinted, loving glasses that we see it through? I think the easiest way is to put a dollar sign in front of it. So, a big part of this talk is going to be on how do you actually use these hours you're sitting on, and hopefully we can get a few steps closer to that. How do you convert those hours to something that you can actually use? These hours are very useful to Epic because it gets people to sit and buy stuff in the item shop. How do we make sure that creators can also utilize those hours? Because 11.2 billion hours is quite a lot of ammunition to play with. And the fact 11.2 billion hours is also the reason that we're actually even able to have this talk. We wouldn't have been able to have this talk 2 years ago because finally this number puts Fortnite in the same range as platforms like TV, TikTok, etc., etc. So let's start with TV. For those of you that don't know Metavision's backstory, we kind of have a weird but loving relationship with TV. So we are fully owned by ITV in the UK. So in the UK, you've got the BBC, which is the big kind of state-owned broadcaster that everyone knows. ITV is the kind of commercial equivalent to that. In the US, it would be like NBC or Fox or something like that. So the UK quite likes its TV. We spend about 112 billion hours a year watching it. But importantly, those 112 billion hours fund a $7 billion a year industry. And that $7 billion brings you shows like Hell's Kitchen, Love Island, these kind of global phenomenon that everyone can kind of recognize and know. And if you do some very rough kind of back of the tissue maths, you get to a rough number that an hour of TV, so one person watching 1 hour of TV in the UK is worth about 6 cents. A little view from a more global perspective, obviously quite a bit larger than UK TV, is TikTok. So the world spends about 730 billion hours scrolling TikTok. TikTok are very, very happy with that because that earns them about $32 billion. So they definitely aren't complaining. So again, that same rough maths, you get about 4 cents for every hour someone spends watching TikTok. So This is a really weird reference. I don't know why we put this in here. So if you do the maths and just kind of roughly like finger in the air, say, okay, fine, an hour on Fortnite is worth 5 cents, like kind of put it between TV and TikTok, you get a rough picture of an industry that's worth about $560 million a year. And in the words of Comrade Legazov from HBO's hit show Chernobyl, that's not great, but it's also not terrible. Ideally, we want to be in a world where engagement 2.0 payouts have a kind of equal contender with advertising payouts as well. We want advertisers to fund Fortnite development just as much as Epic does. But this number is based on an assumption that all hours are worth the same, or at least in a similar ballpark, but they very much aren't. So here's the kind of David and Goliath kind of situation we find ourselves in. So obviously and that's just in the UK, 112 billion hours. Globally, it's like a trillion plus. So how does Fortnite's 11.2 billion hours even have a hope at going against TV? One thing you've got to remember about TV, at least in the UK, is that all advertising has to be squeezed into a 10-minute period within an hour. So you can't have any product placement anywhere else. It has to all be in that little slot. So all of a sudden, that number goes down to about 18 billion hours. 10 minutes out of every 60 minutes gives us 18 billion hours left. And all of that is sold for $7 billion. Already we're starting to get kind of close to where Fortnite is. It does also get even less because of the nature of TV advertising. Again, in the UK, we've got the BBC. They take about 20% of those hours. So again, then we're going down to like 15 billion hours. And then also, I think the main thing with TV, how many people in this room can actually confidently say they've sat down and watched an ad break from start to finish? They haven't picked up their phone. They haven't thought about anything else. They've actually gone, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to watch all of these ads. And I'm really going to think about each one. I imagine pretty much no one. Because of that, there's thousands of people around the world trying to solve that problem, trying to kind of create amazing creative for TV ads. That's why you get like Super Bowl ads, and you do also get some rather niche approaches to it. So pretty extreme lengths. So this is actually a real patent filed by Sony. It's rather Black Mirror-esque. It is an ad break which only ends if you stand up and shout the brand name to finish it. Fortunately for everyone in this room, Fortnite kind of means we don't need to do that. 50 years of game design have built something that is very, very good at, probably the best platform on the planet for capturing people's undivided attention. Fortnite is, and video games in general, I guess, are the only platform where you can actively stop the content if a player takes their hands off the controller. You can't second screen, or at least you can't second screen Fortnite very well. You won't get very far if you're trying to second screen Fortnite. So even though Fortnite has less hours being spent on it at the moment than TV, we think those hours are worth quite a bit more than an hour on TV. So, spoke a lot about numbers, and of course, because this is mine and Ash's and other people's at Metavision's livelihood, we do get quite excited about the numbers, but also we are quite excited about what these numbers could mean for game development and innovation on the platform as well. So obviously Engagement 2.0 and UEFN launched at the same time, and UEFN had quite a massive impact on Fortnite development, but also Engagement 2.0. There's a lot of games out today that just wouldn't have been viable without Engagement 2.0. 2.0 allowed developers to hire animators, kind of build themselves up as quite almost AAA studios or AAA light studios. And we think we almost see if we want to make that happen again in another way. So if another funding source as big or bigger than 2.0 was to come onto the scene, we'd be really excited to see what kind of experiences that are technically possible with UEFN, but might not be economically viable at this stage. So experiences that target different metrics and not just going for pure engagement and pure kind of clickbaity thumbnails and kind of looking like YouTube. Kind of like how YouTube has quite a lot of niche content on it that isn't necessarily designed to get millions and millions of views, but really kind of hones in to a audience that's like interested in geography or architecture or things like that. So we're in quite an exciting time, but also I think it's really important to remember that the rule book hasn't been written yet. This is still very, very early days, and it's kind of up to everyone in this room to write the rule book. TV, if you look at TV, you can kind of assume that there is like a code of conduct, but that's only exists because over the past 100 years, people like us, people sitting in a conference room like this, maybe in the 1920s, thinking how are we going to make TV a viable thing, they wrote those rules over time, and now it's kind of on us to do the same.
So that's a bit around how we think that we're very much at a stage where Fortnite can start to trade blows with those very, very big media channels. So from Network's humble beginnings in 2023, we saw where the space was very much heading. So advertisers were getting a bit nervous, a bit tetchy about bespoke custom builds. The value of the PR headline of X brand goes to Fortnite, builds a bespoke island, started to diminish, essentially. Quality of other UGC experiences on the platform shot up, so making it a very, very tough competition. And nervousness around sort of guaranteeing plays and engagement. So brands started to look elsewhere on the platform. What else can I do on Fortnite rather than build a bespoke custom build? Something more fitting for their business goals and KPIs. So we suggested to the brands and agencies that we work with that maybe we should try something different, go in a different direction. And instead, what we talk to them about is working with existing creators with great maps, popular maps with an existing audience where they can jump in and integrate into them as sponsors. The timing aligned really well, obviously with the advent of UEFN, custom assets, custom audio, so brands could now show up in other people's maps authentically and obviously look the way the brand wanted them to look, which to that day really had to be a bespoke map to make sure the brand showed up in a certain light. So since 2023, I'd say we've learned quite a lot with you guys in the room as well. Some of you we've worked with. So over the last 2 years, we've worked with the likes of Skoda, Versace, Crocs, Philips, Mentos, and a few more. And there's obviously still a lot to learn. Like, please remember that we don't have close to all the answers. No one in this space really has them yet, because we're all sort of trying to work them out together. They're all still being written, and that's something we're actually quite excited about, to be honest. But there are some lessons that we've learned along the way, and we're going to share 3 of those with you today. The 3 lessons we think are probably most fitting and interesting for you guys in the room. First lesson, Ryan.
So first up, the big one. Quite often the first question we generally get asked is how much? How much is this space worth? So again, full transparency, when we started with Skoda back in 2023, we had absolutely no idea. We were able to make a few guesses from Ash's history at an ad agency and my history at a media agency, but it was still very much an educated guess. But we've now had about 2 years dealing with both sides, so dealing with creators as they kind of talk to us about what they think a fair price for their kind of audiences are, but we've also been dealing with ad agencies, creative agencies, media agencies, brands that kind of tell us what they think a fair price is. They've got to go out and they've got to compare this against, do I buy an ad on TV? Do I work with an influencer? So they've got to be able to make that decision to choose Fortnite. So we think we've got kind of enough data at this point to be quite open to creators on where they fall on that spectrum. And we think this transparency at this stage is really, really important, because what we've got to remember is that this is the point where we are competing against TV, social, et cetera, et cetera. So before we can actually get a number, we need to kind of decide what that number is actually going to count. So for example, generally TV charges per 1,000 views. YouTube and TikTok kind of charge per impression. Fortnite needs a metric, and a metric that plays to the platform's strengths, and also makes easy sense to marketers who most of the time might have never played Fortnite in their entire lives. So here's some lovely algebra for everyone in the room. We've kept the algebra quite simple. The formula was a bit more complicated, but we have simplified it down a bit just because it didn't need to be complicated. So we proposed the really kind of strong metric for Fortnite as cost per engaged minute, and this is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about no platform quite engages like video games. It's pretty simple to calculate, we think. As Fortnite is a new platform, we don't want to confuse agencies or brands with some very, very complicated value decision. And we think this kind of, again, plays to Fortnite's strengths. So basically taking the budget, dividing that by the amount of minutes, minus the minutes that the brand isn't being interacted with. So, for example, our Versace campaign, actually, most of the time, a player was interacting with the Versace because it was always in the player's hands. They were firing it. If they weren't firing it, they were either being fired at by it, or it was visible somewhere in the map. If you have a campaign that only appears in the lobby, or a kind of image or something like that, then that number can be quite a bit less. So we have kept it simple. It will get more complicated, but while Fortnite is still in its infancy, let's just keep it simple for everyone's sake. So we've kind of found to date the sweet spot, the number that doesn't scare agencies, but also the number that doesn't piss off Fortnite creators, is about 0.2 cents per minute. So one player playing for 1 minute equals 0.2 cents. Comparing to TV and social, that kind of puts Fortnite at, so TV 6 cents per hour, TikTok 4 cents per hour, that puts Fortnite about 12 cents per hour. That again represents the better engagement without going way off the scale. We do think as marketers kind of get to understand Fortnite, that number will go higher. I think there's a lot more kind of headroom. I think an hour on Fortnite is worth a lot more than 12 cents. But again, there's a kind of journey that everyone in this room needs to go on to convince people that they do need to spend more on Fortnite because it is worth it. And it's also important to note this 0.2 cent isn't a kind of set in stone figure. There's quite a lot of factors that can affect this. It can go a lot higher, it can go slightly lower, as we have experienced over the past 2 years.
So, on to our second lesson. This is all around maps and gameplay design. So, in our view, not all maps are created equal. So what do we mean by that? So, early on, we realized that a lot of brands, you'll be surprised the amount of brands that come to us that want to do something on Fortnite but do not want to touch combat at all. It seems slightly counterintuitive given Fortnite as a platform and what tends to do well, but yeah, we'd be quite wealthy if we had a dollar for every time a brand came to us and said, I want to do Fortnite, zero combat. But it's absolutely something we can navigate, and we have done. Yeah, so we've seen non-combat games with sort of unique or exciting gameplay. They can even start to command a higher value than other combat games even if they've got a smaller audience, for example. So for example, we've recently had a brief from a brand that wanted to reach mostly female audience, so this sort of cozy lean-back, playing cozy lean-back Fortnite experiences. And they would pay more for that because they're in high demand and there's not as much of them out there. It's not always as fine cut as non-combat. Combat, there's a bit of a it's a bit of a grey area. So let's look at a few more examples. Example number one. So when we worked with Philips, with the lovely guys at FH Support and Leon, they wanted a map where we could really take one player and make them the spotlight of that experience when they wielded the Philips One Blade 360. So this sort of gave the player a particular advantage in game, but also came at a risk. And FH Support's Wolves versus Chickens was a fantastic map to do that because it allowed us to hero that one player. Next up, Atlas Creative. So we worked with Atlas on our first integration campaign with Skoda. Like many other brands, they wanted to avoid combat as much as possible with their out of bounds campaign. So we worked with Atlas, who had a really fantastic library of innovative non-combat campaigns, where we sort of leveraged those to bring the Skoda to. So they're hide and seek, they're only up, and we managed to squeeze in a bed wars after much discussion with the client, because it had fantastical weapons versus real world weapons. So we're happy to get away with that. And then finally onto Crocs with the great guys at Beyond Creative. So last year you might have known that Crocs did their sort of Crocs official collaboration with Fortnite with some pretty cool shoes. In the run up to that, they wanted to create a bit of groundswell around the campaign and build a bit of sort of brand affinity across the ecosystem. So we worked with them to integrate them into a few Fortnite maps. One of them was Beyond's Airship Wars. So the reason why this worked really well is because Beyond were very much open to allowing the brand to come in and almost do a full takeover of that map. So Crocs poured sort of a lot of love into this. They built a whole lore, a campaign narrative. There were custom assets, custom NPCs, and to really bring that to life and truly sort of show it in its best possible light, it really deserved a full sort of map takeover. And obviously some maps aren't going to be open to that, but again, if you've got a map that you are happy to let a brand sort of really push the limits of what is possible, then that's going to be of particular value to a brand. Back to you, Ryan.
So, some of you in the room may know what the parasol is doing there. Lesson 3, it's something we have learned time and time again. If you've ever been in a room with me for more than 5 minutes, you've probably heard me tell the parasol story. I'm not going to tell the parasol story now because I've told it too many times. But if anyone wants to hear about how we saved the BBC's first step into Fortnite by placing a single parasol, I would love to tell it to you. But the kind of core of that story is a fable on how we learned how to always put gameplay and entertainment at the heart of what we do. There's a few kind of theories on what an integration in a game should look like. Some people think they should be billboards. Some people think they should be video ads. We very much think that if something exists in a game, then the rules of the game also apply to it. So if you want to do something in Fortnite, it has to be fun, it has to be engaging, and it has to empower the player in some way. The integration needs to do exactly the same thing. So quite often, the best form of an integration actually comes in a feature that you've been wanting to add to your game for a while anyway. It doesn't have to get in the way of the player. It doesn't have to stop the player from doing anything that they want. So, a great example of that, which Ash is about to demonstrate. So take our most recent campaign with Mentos, again, working with the lovely folks at FH Support.
Ta-da!
Beyond and Bullseye. I will actually say this does technically work. There is actually, one sec.
We've got ammunition.
It does actually come with ammunition. Everyone, don't worry, we're not going to fire it on stage. It is actually very, very underwhelming if you fire it, because the Mentos experiment basically doesn't work if the bottle is on its side. We did create a version of this that used compressed CO2 to make it a lot more powerful. Someone actually, I think, dislocated or broke their shoulder.
Dislocated their shoulder.
And that was it at 30%. We had a video of it on 70%, and it basically shot a mechanic's workbench across a garage. So quite a powerful weapon, but also, again, kind of tapping into our kind of mantra of giving something valuable to the player. It was also quite powerful on Fortnite as well. So some people on Fortnite just don't like builds. I don't like builds. There's nothing you can really do against a player that's deciding to build a bunch of stuff in your face. So we kind of saw, there's a bit of a gap here for an actual dedicated anti-build weapon on Fortnite. This campaign could have been quite an underwhelming billboard. It could have been something where you see the Mentos Fizooka experiment. But instead, because it actually built itself into gameplay, players really, really enjoyed it. Because I think a big reason why this worked is that this wasn't the brand's idea. The brand didn't want to do this. We had to take them, us and BBH had to kind of take them on this journey to actually say, no, this is what Fortnite want, this is what players want. And throughout the entire process, we needed to make sure that it was the creators making the decisions. So anyone that was integrating it into their map, they had full control over the meta of this weapon. They could debuff it, they could buff it, just to make sure it kind of lined up to their game. From that base, you just saw the Fazooka in real life. We actually sent out about 10 or 15 of these Fazookas all around the world. People quite liked shooting each other with Mentos and cola. But we're not just going to toot our own horn, because again, this is very much on everyone in this room to push this space forward. There isn't one entity out there that can make this thing go against TikTok, TV, and like any other of the kind of traditional big boy media platforms. So talk a little bit about Pickle Quest. So Good Gamers are pretty much a masterclass in not only understanding their audiences and kind of constantly refining their games to a very, very fine point based on that feedback, but also in our conversations with them, they are very, very steadfast protectors of their players. If we go to them with a terrible idea, they will quite quickly tell us that's a terrible, terrible idea.
In a nice way.
In a nice way. They are also very, very polite. I think Pickle Quest kind of expertly balanced a very fine line by leaning into the kind of fun and like very, very, it's hard to put into words, but I feel like you can recognize a Good Gamer's game when you're playing it. It's like quite a light-hearted kind of view on fun. And of course, because of that, because it kind of spoke to players and gave them something actually useful, it gave them kind of real world rewards off platform and didn't kind of force them to watch a Popeyes 20-second ad and distract them from the game. The game did really well, but also off-platform, people were really happy about it. I think it got over 2 million views on TikTok and X. And that was because, again, the very, very loyal murder mystery community felt listened to and they wanted to talk about it. So your value goes far beyond your audience size. So the CPEM thing earlier, 0.2 cents, you might think, okay, if I've got a game that has, I'm not going to try and do the maths on my head, but like if I've got a game that has 1,000 minutes played per week, does that mean I'm only going to get basically a round of drinks from Metavision to advertise on it? The answer is very much no. There is also value in your kind of your decisions, your development, your input on what the creative should look like, because we don't understand your audiences as well as you do. We might understand our audiences of the games that we build, but no one understands their audience better than the people that have created the game. You know what features players want and have been asking for, and those are often the best things to have as an integration, but you also know what they don't like. So we have quite a lot of work to do when we talk to brands, where we have to tell them that what works on TV and what works on social doesn't, quite often, most of the time, doesn't work on Fortnite. And that if they want to work on Fortnite, the lead creative voice in the room has to be the map creator. And as that creative voice, and just like any other field, creative voices do need to get paid for that. So it's important to always factor that in. There's always going to be a minimum what you should charge for an integration. We would say that no matter, even if your audience is tiny, your input and your expertise is still worth at least $5,000. That is an absolute bottom rung figure. Quite often, again, with your insight on 3D assets, on gameplay, and the hours you spend on that, and also, again, your unique insight on your audience that no one else has, that can go quite a bit higher as well, depending on the scope and depending on the budget for the project.
So we'll start to wrap things up now before we throw to a few questions. To the next slide. There we go. Fishstick and his Illuminati pals. So, hopefully you found this session somewhat informative and insightful, and the numbers and CPEM specifically hasn't been too overwhelming. I hope you've given you a nice little peek under the bonnet of what we're doing at Metavision, how we're working with creators like yourselves, and how we're faring in the space and some of the lessons that we've learned. Ultimately, we think it's at events like this conference where we will collectively sort of write the rule book, which is still being written, and where we can start to really bring Fortnite to a place where we can go shoulder to shoulder with those media channels that we've talked about. I think we think it's collectively our responsibility for us to work together, and we're very excited to do that with you guys and work with everyone in the room to do just that. Very much like our very own UEFN Illuminati. So in the spirit of chatting about this so we can sort of write the rulebook together, happy to throw to some questions to you guys if you've got any. Thank you.